Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I'm Dan Hall, one of your hosts. I'm often asked to explain what the hell an anomaly is. And to me, an anomaly is something new or different, something that in some cases isn't expected. So we get to return to a topic that's really important to me that I've been thinking about for quite a while. And that's the topic of Bigfoot. And our guest tonight is Brett Eichenberger, who's made two really intriguing films on Bigfoot. So we want to welcome you to the show, Brett. Thanks for coming on with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Sure. So you're a documentarian, you're a storyteller, and I
hmm
guess the obvious question is, what drew you to these two films that you've made about Bigfoot?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I'll keep it truncated. And it all starts with my origins in Oregon and
Hmm.
growing up in the Pacific Northwest. I was born here. I'm an Oregon native, and I will never leave the Pacific Northwest. I consider the entire. I really actually consider the entire West Coast my home. Because I do spend a lot of time in California as well, but Oregon and Washington are really truly my homes. And I've been fascinated with Bigfoot for as long as I can remember. I mean, I think that must go back to 5, 6 years old when I
Hmm.
first saw the famous frame
Pat-
352 of Patty.
Patterson Gimlin film. That's what started
Yeah.
it for me too.
Yeah. I think that captured the attention of so many folks, regardless of the age, around the world. And it was one of those things where it's been in the back of my mind. I've always wanted to do films on it. And with the pandemic, my quote unquote day job is as a, video producer director for corporate videos and commercials and whatnot. And so that all dried up during the pandemic. And my wife, Jill Remensnyder, who's also the producer on both films and the other Flashy Beauty pieces. Her and I said, you know what? It's time. Now's the time for us to do that quote unquote social distancing Bigfoot documentary where, if we're going to stay away from people, we're going to go out in the woods and finally tell the story that we want to tell. And that's kind of how it came about. But we kind of sort of had some false starts too, leading into that. But
Talk
that's
about
basically the
those.
story.
Talk about the
The,
false starts.
the false starts. Well, so our history as filmmakers goes back all the way to 2011 with our first feature film called Light of Mine. And through that process, we played some prestigious film festivals, and this doesn't even really count our short films that we did prior to that. But through that process, you meet people. We ended up meeting some investors who were interested in funding a sci-fi film that we wrote. And these investors just happened to be friends with some Bigfoot folks,
Hmm.
and they were invited to a conference called Beachfoot, which many people in the Bigfoot community have heard of. And Beachfoot was started by Todd Neese back in it's been probably 2006 or so, something like that. And they asked Jill and I if we wanted to go to this Bigfoot conference, and it was an invite only thing, and it was a special deal. And we were like, we didn't even hesitate. We answered in unison. And we ended up going to this conference, and lo and behold, I mean, we walk into this campsite, and here's Ron Moorhead and Peter Byrne and
Uh-huh.
Todd Neese and all of these Bigfoot all stars, and we were kind of like shocked, uh, what's the word? Starstruck.
Yeah.
And so, these people were very approachable, very friendly. We felt comfortable asking them any questions, and so we maintained a relationship, and we attended subsequent Beachfoots just as folks wanting to know the truth and learn about Bigfoot. And when it came time for us to do the documentary, we were able to comfortably go back and say, "Hey, we'd like to do this documentary," and they were open armed about it and said, "Yeah, please, you're more than welcome to do the interviews." And one thing led to another, and once we demonstrated that we were serious and professional, they, people were so gracious in giving us contacts, and whatnot. So um, going back to answer your question about the false start was with these same investor guys, they were interested in doing a Bigfoot documentary. And so we started putting that together with a friend of mine who had won Sundance a couple of times. And we thought, attaching a kind of a semi-known name director to the project would get some serious eyeballs on the project and give Bigfoot the serious attention that it deserves. And unfortunately, it didn't come together. He felt like it was too much of a career risk and gamble, which we understood. But we never lost sight of doing something that was very professional in nature, that felt a little bit more like a National Geographic documentary than an expedition Bigfoot, if you will.
Mhm.
Less sensational, something that really, like I said, takes the subject matter seriously and dives deep into the emotional component of a Bigfoot sighting. So that's what we ended up doing is we were just like, you know what, let's just do it ourselves. And we'll keep the crew size extremely small. So it was myself, Jill, and Michael Ferry, the cinematographer. And by being such a small crew wearing so many different hats, we were able to be nimble and move quick and be very intimate with the folks that we were interviewing, which is really important to get emotion and truth out of folks.
Yeah, I have been intrigued by this same topic, Bigfoot, like you, since I saw the Patterson Gimlin film. But
Hmm.
my view about what Bigfoot is has really changed over the years.
Hmm.
I used to think it was nothing more than a flesh and blood animal, but your subsequent Flash of Beauty film delves into the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot, and I find that very interesting. So I guess I would feel safe in saying I have no idea in hell what Bigfoot is, but it's pretty dang interesting. Whatever. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how we started off too, is that the first beach foot that we attended, we started hearing these paranormal murmurings, and most of those were from Ron Moorhead. Now, Ron Moorhead, Todd Neese, Peter Byrne, those guys are all great friends. Obviously, Peter has passed away, but Ron was very much a paranormal believer. And Todd Neese, and especially Peter Byrne, were both very much in the flesh and blood. This thing is a relic hominid or an ape or something like that. And so, Ron would tell these stories about Sierra Camp where they'd follow these tracks and they would just stop, like the thing just disappeared. And, I'm looking at Jill and Jill's looking at me and we're just like, what? This makes no sense at all. I mean, this is, and I remember privately talking to her, I think, in the car on the way home or something. I was like, this thing is just, it's probably an ape that's just really good at avoiding things. And the whole paranormal aspect of it just seems absurd. But when you start talking to people such as Ron, and you start talking to people that have witnessed these orbs and these disappearing Bigfoot and stuff like that, you start to really see that there is something very odd going around or going
mhm.
on. And there really is something to it. And I think that what that particular thing is, has its basis in quantum mechanics, quantum science, because in knowing just a eensy tiny bit sort of quantum mechanics, I can see the relation. And Ron's written a whole book about it called The Quantum Bigfoot. And I would encourage everybody to read that book. It's a fantastic book. It really gets into it. And the other book that I would highly recommend is Dark Matter Monsters by Dr. Simeon Hine.
And we've had Simeon on our show. That's
Oh,
somebody
cool.
I was going to bring up because that's exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we set out to make a Flash of Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot, I said to Jill and Mike, I said, look, we've got to have a scientific basis for some of these ideas. Otherwise, we're just going to get laughed at. We've got to throw some sort of theory. And I had not heard of Simeon Hine. I'd not heard of his book. And one day, doing some research, I stumbled upon Simeon Hine. And as it turns out, we had a very close friend in common. And so I reached out to her and I was like, would you mind connecting me with Dr. Hine? I would love to speak with him. And, we talked on the phone. I said, look, I mean, we're making a documentary that could really use, your hypotheses and your ideas. And he said, I am all about it. And it was only a few weeks later that we went up to Pullman, Washington, and did an interview. We actually did an interview with him at his alma mater at Washington State University, which was pretty cool.
Right.
Go Cougars! My nephew's a Cougar. Um, so yeah, I mean, and after that interview with Dr. Hine, it's like the brain just went into overdrive, putting all of these different things together and going, this isn't voodoo or witchcraft or demonic or anything like that. This is just a science that we're just starting to understand.
We interviewed a lady whose name is Angela Smith, and she's a remote viewer, and she
Hmm.
was talking about remote viewing aliens, but a term that she used, and I could appreciate that because I used to be a sociology teacher in another life, was the
Hmm.
idea of cultural trance. And what she was talking about, in my explanation of that, would be that we are taught from, you know, the first day we enter school that reality is one way. And
Yeah.
anything that happens that contradicts that is very disruptive. And I think when we're talking Sasquatch, Bigfoot, we're talking having to break through the cultural trance. And
Yes.
it's difficult because one of the things I found is that if you start talking about things that don't fit into the normal scheme or the normal dialogue about things, you can get a lot of pushback against that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I wonder if that's fear-based or and you being a sociologist, because it's funny because we keep talking about this, and Dr. Simeon Hine,
He's a sociologist. Yeah,
yeah, he's a sociologist, and he talks about the hidden events and stuff like that. But from a sociological perspective, I've always wondered, why isn't somebody doing, if Bigfoot isn't real, then it's the greatest mass hallucination in
hmm
history. Because I think, just if you just crunch the numbers, there's no way, there's no possible way that every single sighting that's ever taken place in history has been something else, a bear, whatever, a hallucination. I can't even say that word right now. It's the COVID meds.
Yeah, it's a COVID.
It's the COVID, but it's so I find that super fascinating that you could almost prove Bigfoot exists sort of from a sociological perspective in some ways once
Just
you
by
start crunching the numbers.
yeah, the anecdotal evidence. If you look at the BFRO's website, they've got a ton of Bigfoot sightings throughout not only North America, but throughout the world. And so, are these people just making stuff up, or are they having actual experiences with a creature? I would defer to the latter point of view.
Exactly. And for me, that's all the proof I need, because it just makes too much sense.
Yeah,
And people might say that maybe I'm a little too optimistic, but that's just who I am. That's just my nature. And I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. And when you start thinking, and this, we highlighted this in our first film, when you start thinking about the lingering after effects of a Bigfoot sighting, the post-traumatic stress disorder, if you want to call it that, um, then in my opinion, you've got some real evidence. And you see this in court cases, with murder trials or whatever. An eyewitness sees somebody killed, or somebody has witnessed a horrific car accident or whatever, or combat veterans, the best example. These people that have had these Bigfoot sightings are having these same reactions, these same disorders, these hunters that will not go back into the forest under any circumstances. And some of these guys it's like they're shell shocked. It wasn't that they were attacked or felt threatened. It was that what they observed um, changed their world view, their paradigm so dramatically, so drastically that it rewired the brain completely, you know. And this numbers in the tens of thousands, from our calculations, from the people that we've interviewed and all over the country. There's something to that. And doctors and scientists say that you can actually image the brain and see that bruise or that mark on the brain where that post-traumatic stress disorder has occurred, which leaves physical evidence that something has happened. So I think to me that's really exciting that we have that.
You mentioned where's that Bigfoot gathering that you and your wife went to? Where's that physically located?
Beachfoot's on the Central Oregon coast.
Okay,
It's
it's Oregon.
it's not yeah, it's not too far from Newport, Oregon.
Okay, so I've got an alternative uh, get together for Bigfoot that you might want to take advantage of and go attend. It's called the
Hmm.
Bigfoot Summit, and it's our Sasquatch Summit, and it's in Ocean Shores every year. And that's just a
Yeah.
great uh, venue for meeting people who are into Bigfoot. So you might want to check that out.
We've heard about it quite a bit, Dan, and we just haven't had a chance to make it. Our schedules
Yeah,
never
and
aligned.
it went by the wayside with COVID, but they've started that again. And usually
Good, good.
it's in right before Thanksgiving. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't know. I haven't looked at it this year, but so what else have you discovered about Bigfoot as a creature other than it's just a mystery?
Well, they're very much like people. In so many different ways are they like people. And, from what we can tell, there's different races, I guess maybe you could call them. Again, I'm not a biologist or anything like that, but there's different types. Maybe we'll just call them types, um, by regions. And that makes sense, obviously. So we just got back from Alaska, just a few days ago, and we were up in the tiny, tiny village of Nonwalek, Alaska, which is an invite-only village of natives. And some of your listeners might remember Nonwalek from the TV show Alaska Killer Bigfoot. And we weren't necessarily up there to investigate that story per se. We just wanted to talk to some of the natives that have had Bigfoot experiences. And and you can tell from what they're talking about and some of their experiences that this is a different type of Bigfoot. It's more aggressive. It seems like that would make a lot of sense, being that Alaska really only has maybe 4 months in southern Alaska of kind of decent weather, if you will. So they really fight hard for their food and their territory. Whereas Oregon, California, you have these stories of these habituations, people that are leaving gifts and sharing some of the produce that they're growing in their gardens
Hmm.
with them. Arla Williams is a famous example of that. And then you have, Bigfoot in, the areas of the Midwest that have lived harmoniously with different tribes. And I'm talking a lot about tribes because that's Flash of Beauty 3. That's the next film that we're making. It's
Oh,
entirely
okay.
native centric because we want to do a documentary that really gets into the history of Bigfoot,
Hmm.
going back millennia. And so many tribes, I shouldn't say so many, but nearly every tribe on the North American continent has a relationship with Bigfoot. There's hardly an exception to that. In fact, I think we're going to try and interview a chief in Rhode Island.
Oh,
Their tribe has, you don't think, when you think of Bigfoot, you don't think of Rhode Island, but they've had relationships with Sasquatch. So um, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but yeah, they're definitely like people. There are some very, very violent ones, that could cause harm and probably do cause harm to humans. And David Pilates' work, Missing 411, some of those
right.
missing people could be Bigfoot related. I'm not
Certainly
afraid to say
could.
that.
Yeah, they
Hmm.
certainly could.
Yeah. Especially with the staggering numbers of the people that go missing. Just in Alaska alone, between 500 and 2,000 people go missing a year
Wow.
in that state. And some of those are very much explainable and others really aren't.
A
That's
mystery.
just Alaska. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't know. You don't know. We've heard stories about Albert Ostman and people being kidnapped and stuff. So it's possible. It's possible. But there are also Bigfoot out there that are highly spiritual. They care about humans. They care about the earth. Um, and they just want nothing but good, and we have people like that as well.
I lived in Bellingham for a year,
Hmm.
and I got to know some people on the Lummi reservation, and I have a really
Sure.
dear friend who was a drug and alcohol counselor out there, and we used to spend a lot of time looking for Sasquatch. I guess I would posit the idea that maybe Sasquatch, you don't see Sasquatch unless Sasquatch wants you to see Sasquatch.
Yes.
But my friend Sherry, who I'm talking about, was the drug alcohol counselor. She had three sightings of Bigfoot while she was on
Wow.
the Lummi reservation. And Brett, I spent a shitload of time out there and never saw. I mean, I heard what could have been vocalizations, and I maybe heard some wood knocks, but I sure as hell never saw a Sasquatch. So I think there is a real unique. I'm glad you're doing the picture, the subsequent flash of beauty on native populations, because they have a very different view of Sasquatch than the white the dominant culture does. So I think that's a good place to be going with your.
Yeah. 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 We absolutely agree. And the reality that we're starting to see right now is that there was a divide once the Europeans started, colonizing North America. Um, Obviously, there was genocide, there was atrocities, and what we're starting to figure out is that the Bigfoot were witnessing this, and they were witnessing this all over North America, and they did not want to have anything to do with us, um, or the white people, Spaniards, what have you, whoever was doing these atrocities. And so they split and they hid and they went away. They just saw us as horrible, evil people.
Well, they may be right.
Hmm.
Yeah, they may be right. I might pass on to the friend of mine that she doesn't live in Bellingham anymore. She lives in Florida, but she might be an interesting person because of the sightings she's had with Bigfoot, and she really got to know that Lemmy culture and how they identified with Bigfoot. So I'm going to kind of break us in a slightly different way here, and it's based on Simeon Hines' ideas. So
Yeah.
I'm really kind of fascinated in cryptids in general,
Hmm.
and I wonder if some of the things we're talking about, the ability of certain creatures to kind of mask their existence, could be applied toward other creatures, other cryptids. What do you think about that?
I think it's entirely possible. I think it's absolutely possible. As a matter of fact, the biggest example of that comes to mind is actually an alien sighting. But I think it just goes to show that it's possible in a bunch of these cryptids. And that alien sighting was famous, or it's becoming famous. It took place a couple of years ago in Las Vegas. And there was a 15-year-old boy named Angel who had a sighting of these aliens. This UFO reportedly crashed in his backyard in Las Vegas, which
I
sounds like
think
a
I heard
Steven
of
Spielberg
this.
movie.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I
yeah.
heard of this.
It literally sounds like a made-up sci-fi film, but by all indications, it really happened. In fact, there were ring cameras around the neighborhood that caught a, you know, flashing light going across the sky at the exact same time. But anyways, he said that he saw these aliens and he saw them and then they instantly went blurry,
Hmm.
which to me is cloaking,
Yeah,
of some sort.
that's what
And
it sounds like.
yeah, it sounds exactly like cloaking. And we've got footage in A Flash of Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot, that I would bet my life on being real cloaking footage.
Hmm.
Um, I am convinced 100% that is legitimate footage. I have seen no tampering. Barb Shoop has been forthright with me. I have analyzed the actual file that came off her iPod Touch, and as a matter of fact, I have sent it to the individual who won the Oscar for creating. Actually, I'm sorry, he won the Academy Award for What Dreams May Come, but he was the original designer of the Predator effect, and I sent it
Oh,
to him for
wow.
his opinion.
Wow.
And we've been in touch, and I'm hoping to set up an interview sometime where we can talk about this. He lives in Los Angeles, but yeah, I think that this is something that cryptids somehow know to do, and it's a frequency thing. Um, but yeah, I who knows what's lurking around us that we can't see, right?
Yeah, I teach a class, a local class here in Olympia on cryptozoology. And one of the first things
Hmm.
we talk about is the electromagnetic spectrum. And
Yeah,
we can't see most of what's in the electromagnetic spectrum, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And I think
yeah.
that becomes an explanation for some of these cryptids. Another cryptid that I've really become fascinated on, and I'm not suggesting that you need to go out and make a documentary about this, but if you're familiar with what happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, back in
Uh-huh.
1967 and 67, the Mothman creature, well, that
Yeah, yeah.
seems to be some things very similar to that. That
Yeah, that's a strange cryptid. Have you seen the latest episode of Unsolved Mysteries with Lon Strickler and the sightings around Chicago and whatnot?
Uh, I know Lon. He's been on our show. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if I've seen um, the most recent episode, but yeah, I'm very familiar with what's going on in Chicago too.
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very strange. And it seems like there's been a lot of Mothman sightings, but without any sort of Point Pleasant type um, you know, disaster afterwards.
Right.
So maybe that was just kind of like a one-off. Well, no, that's not true because there has been a couple of other Mothman sightings prior to disasters in other places too, hasn't there?
Well, I think something they sometimes refer to as the blackbird of Chernobyl could have been a
Uh-huh.
Mothman creature. And the World Trade Center collapse, there's a picture of something that was taken by someone, uh, some creature flying in the sky that could have been a Mothman kind of creature. And obviously,
Oh,
collapse of the World Trade Center qualifies as a natural disaster. So, anyway,
yeah.
just a whole variety of intriguing kinds of things. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Mothman is beguiling. I've got to admit, I've got a little stuffed black it's like a little stuffed animal Mothman.
you
And his
do.
wings, yeah, his wings fold over and cover his red eyes with like magnets. It's pretty cute. I'll
Well,
have to send you a picture of it.
we are definitely kindred spirits because I have a Mothman T-shirt, a couple of Mothman T-shirts that I've got from the Mothman Museum there in Point Pleasant.
Cool. Cool.
Uh, are you going to continue down this road of exploring the paranormal, or are you going to kind of go back to a different stories to tell that don't have paranormal aspects to them?
Well, as a filmmaker, I'm a storyteller.
Yeah,
And if there's a story that comes along that I feel needs to be told and I have the opportunity to do it, then that's what I'm going to do. Right now, my head is in the realm of Bigfoot and other odd things. There's a chance that we might do a Dogman documentary at some point.
no,
But I'll be honest with you, Dogman scares the crap out of me. Um, Bigfoot, not as much, but Dogman's a little different story. Um, so I don't know. I mean, Jill, my wife and the producer on the series, she's just written and directed a comedy. It has nothing to do with the paranormal.
yeah,
It's about a motivational speaker who's frankly having the worst day of his life.
Hmm.
and everything crumbles around him, and that'll be out next year. And I really enjoy doing movies like that. I was the
Yeah.
producer on this one. So we'll see what happens. Steven Spielberg is my hero. I've got to admit, I look to him for inspiration, and he arguably has done the greatest sci-fi film of all time in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I would love to do something like that. That's a
Wow, that
scripted
would be
film that
great.
has that same type of meaning and depth to it. And I'm also fascinated by historical stories. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I guess as a documentarian, you have to be open to any particular story that presents itself.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's nice to be varied and have a lot of different interests.
yeah. And I can't say that I am working on two new Bigfoot films. The one I just mentioned, Flash of Beauty 3, which is the native experience, and the other one is that I've been working on for the last couple of years is the Sierra Sounds.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
we've become friends with Ron, and we've gotten to know the remaining members of the Sierra camp, and we've interviewed them. And so the film that comes out is going to expose a whole different side of the Sierra sounds and the Sierra camp that nobody has ever heard before. And we were lucky enough to have visited the Sierra camp about a month ago, actually. I think it was actually there a month ago today. I'd left camp a month ago on the 24th. So that's going to be a real eye-opening film. I'm really excited to get that out. But it's been the hardest movie to make in my life. It's been very, very tough.
Why has that been so challenging?
For a lot of different reasons. One is that there's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot of evidence I think that we need to show in a different light, show it in a way that people haven't seen before, because people are very familiar with Ron Moorhead's story. But it's not, and this film is Ron Moorhead is a supporting character, because there are many other voices that just frankly haven't been heard um, in this story, and that's been by choice. They just haven't wanted to come out and talk about their experiences, and now they do. And we've had a chance to interview those folks, people such as Lewis Johnson and David Johnson, and the Al Berry's son we'll speak with. And so just organizing all of that and shooting the film entirely in the state of California, there's been it's just been tough, but it's been worth it, 100% worth it.
One of the most fascinating things about Ron's work was, and I can't remember the guy's name, but the fact that he brought a linguist with him
Hmm.
into his camp, and the linguist right away identified the Sierra Sounds as a language. I thought that was
Yes,
pretty profound.
it's very profound. That's Scott Nelson. And we're going to be interviewing Scott Nelson in November in Kansas City. And we've met Scott Nelson before. He was in our first film. Um, but yeah, Scott is the real deal. The Navy doesn't just hire guys and keep them around for 30 years that aren't good at what they do. And Scott is one of the best. And we're also going to be interviewing other cryptolinguists. I mean, I really want to push the point home that these things were really there. These things were really talking. This is not mumbo jumbo. This was not made up. This was not, some people out there say that it's been debunked and it took place in a studio. And I'll tell you what, the original members of the camp, are pretty upset about that
Oh,
because they heard because of the fear they were in when they first heard these voices huddled up in their little shelter. I mean, it scared the hell out of them. One guy wanted to leave right then and there. He was so scared. And this is not
really?
a place that you want to try and leave in the middle of the night. That's a death wish,
Yeah.
regardless of what's out there.
Hmm.
But once he finally did at dawn the next day, he hiked 8 miles down to the nearest road, hitchhiked, got to a payphone, called his wife, and she came and picked him up. He went all the way home, 100 miles away, and put chairs on all of the doors in his house to prevent whatever it
Really?
was he'd heard the night before from coming in his house. That's
Really?
how bad it scared him. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's people out there saying, well, these are recorded in the studio if you listen to them. They have no idea what they're talking about. So we're going to show a lot of really cool and new evidence.
I was talking about that Sasquatch summit that I went to, and just to relate to something that you're just talking about, I met a guy there who's a clinical psychologist, and he had a Bigfoot experience with
Mm,
his family down by the Oregon caves, and he started crying when he was telling me about that, and I
yeah.
realized the emotional impact that just seeing this creature had, and I guess being afraid for his family's life. But that was kind of profound for me to realize that that seeing a Sasquatch had caused that kind of reaction in somebody.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget in their daily lives that, humans have a reptilian animal primordial part of their brain that kicks in when you see something or experience something that could threaten your life or your family's life. And this is something that us humans only encounter maybe once in our lives, maybe a few times in our lives, if ever, where we have to get to that point where it's like I might need to kill something in order to save myself or my family.
Right.
Or I might be food. We interviewed Fred Roll last week. He's a native up in Alaska, and many people have heard his story. And Fred says, it was the first time in my life that I understood what prey felt like. He said, this thing looked at me and I felt like food. I felt no worth. I was just food. And these are the profound experiences that we talk about where, like, how do you really come up to somebody who's crying or teary-eyed or shaking when they tell the story and say, nah, you made this up, or it was a bear. I mean, these people know exactly what they saw. They know exactly what they saw so much that they've devoted the rest of their lives to proving it to other people, like the individual you're talking about. I know who you're talking about. And seeing it again to prove to themselves that they really saw it. That's true with a lot of different people. It becomes an obsession, and they're willing to throw anything and everything at it. It parallels the story of Oregonian, the film A Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
It
where he
does.
kind of just gave up everything, gave up his family, everything in order to quench this thirst for knowing and truth and knowledge. He had to know. And this is so common in the world of Bigfoot.
I'm going to share one other organization I'm familiar with that's kind of relative to what we're talking about. Have you ever heard of Opus, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support?
I don't know that I have, to be honest with you, Dan.
That might be worth something looking into. I've been a member of Opus for several years. I used to be a MUFON field investigator,
Uh-huh.
but I kind of gravitated more toward Opus. So Opus is an organization, and they have a website where you can go on and check out what they do. But basically, they have people that are trained to talk with folks that have had paranormal experiences. And if they have had something that's paranormal that's been traumatic, there's a list of resources they have in every state where they can talk to somebody to help them deal with that trauma, regardless of whether it might be a hypnotherapist or somebody who could just do some kind of counseling to deal with the trauma they might experience. So that might be something that you want to look into that's very relevant to what we're talking about here.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know how I've never heard of this before.
Well,
Huh.
I hadn't heard of it for a long time either until several years ago. So I guess the world is a very interesting place, and there's a lot of interesting things. And one of the great things you're doing, Brett, is to make people aware of those interesting things. So I really
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate you coming on the show and taking time to talk about this.
You're very welcome, Dan. You're very welcome. And I would just want to encourage people, to not be afraid. I don't think that through our research, I don't think that these things that are mysteries, these things that we can't see, I don't think that they're bad. I think there's certainly is some bad stuff out there in the world. People are bad. There's bad people, but I think that it's just not knowing, what you're dealing with is where we create fear, and that's perfectly understandable. But the point is that there's a beauty in all of it, and that's where our title comes from, a flash of beauty, is that you get these flashes of beauties in the mysterious and in the unknown. And so, keep keep out keep going out there, keep looking, keep doing the research. And I really appreciate you having me on tonight.
Sure. Anytime you want to come back on to talk about any of your other projects or these subsequent projects during Bigfoot, we'd love to have you. So,
Of course.
enjoy being a Portlandian. Is that the correct term for somebody that
Yeah.
lives in Portland? My nephew lives in Portland, and he really likes it down there. So, we'll let you get back to doing what you enjoy. And thanks again
Okay.
for being on the program.
You're very welcome, Dan. Take care. Have a great evening.
Yeah, you too.
Bye bye.